From the heartland of America and the gateway to the West, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie. This is Coast to Coast AM. Later tonight, strange colors and what they mean to all of us. Here's what's happening. Binance, the world's largest cryptocurrency exchange, will pay more than $4 billion in a plea agreement with the U.S. government. Prosecutors say the CEO has also pled guilty in Seattle federal court to violating U.S. law in a settlement that resolves a years-long criminal investigation. Binance faces 3 criminal charges for violating U.S. anti-money laundering laws, a conspiracy charge, and violating the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. My gosh. More than half of the American voters, 52%, say they or someone in their household owns a gun. Out of the latest poll, and the highest share of voters who say they or someone in their household owns a gun in history, on a question dating back to 1999. In 2019, 46% of Americans said that they or someone in their household owned a gun. Now it's up to 52%. Concerns about certain crimes are at the highest levels in decades, causing Americans to isolate themselves from their communities. According to a poll, the spike in fear comes as violent crime has decreased nationwide, but property crime has jumped up, according to the FBI. A recent Gallup poll found that 28% of Americans worry frequently or occasionally that they will be murdered. That's a near record high. Israel's government and Hamas have agreed to a 4-day pause in fighting to allow the release of 50 hostages held in Gaza in exchange for 150 Palestinians imprisoned in Israel and the entry of humanitarian aid into the besieged enclave. Dr. John Curtis, onlinecolumnist.com, with us here. John, are we going to see an end to this conflict or what?
Well, this certainly isn't going to end it. I think this really opens up a can of worms for Israel. Because really, once you start rewarding hostage taking, and that's exactly what is being done now. And God knows, we don't know how much they're paying in order to get these hostages out, and what other kinds of concessions are being made to Hamas. You know that they run an underground like subway system, a set of tunnels, and they live down there. And they run the government from underneath the tunnels. It's almost like a fail-safe mechanism for them to continue plundering Gaza at the same time, making it almost impossible to root them out. So, yes, it's a good publicity stunt right now to show that the Qataris, are operating as some kind of a mediator here. But think about who Israel is having to negotiate with right now. They're having to negotiate with Yahweh Sinwar. He's the architect. He's the mastermind of the slaughter that took place October 7th. He was in an Israeli jail for, I think, 11 years. He was sprung out with another prisoner swap at the time for Gilad Shalit, who was a Israeli military guy that was quite popular and became like a fervor like Brittany Griner over in Israel, and they finally got him out. But, George, once you start this is like these Somali pirates. Once you start, paying ransom for these folks, and of course everybody wants to see them released, but at what price? And how much more will this encourage them to take more hostages in the future? So I think the Israelis must be thinking at this point, biting their tongue and letting this thing go through, but then having to reconsider what they're going to do in the future. Don't forget there's still going to be approximately 180 hostages left, and 10 of whom are American. And Biden would like to see them released, but what is he going to have to pay to get them out? That is the question. So I think it's a short-term solution right now. I don't think it in any way uproots Hamas. They get more fuel and more supplies to live to see another day.
John Curtis, onlinecolumnist.com. Thank you, John. Home sales may have their worst year in 30 years. Sales slumped in October and prices continued to climb as mortgage rates surged last month and inventory remained extraordinarily low. Home sales remained at a 13-year low as buyers competed for the few available homes on the market. Here's Catherine Austin Fitz with her thoughts on whether we're going to get out of this mess. Catherine, what do you think?
Well, George, I think home prices are certainly home sales are going to slow, and it wouldn't surprise me to see it even slow in 2024. You have a lot of institutional money, including money trying to get out of the fixed income market, looking for real assets. So we have more institutional purchases in the residential market, and then, of course, monetary policy is highly inflationary. So a lot of what you've been watching in the increase in home prices, not just in the last year or two, is really debasement of the dollar. And that trend is going to continue. That's a clear primary trend right now. And finally, of course, interest rates up. So first-time home buyers are having trouble getting into the market. Usually that's what bounces the whole market up. The first-time home buyers come in, and then the former first-time home buyers become second home buyers, and it sort of scales up. That dynamic is not happening the way it should. And I would expect to see tough times in 2024 economically. So don't be surprised if this doesn't continue. I would point out one of the reasons for the other reason, in addition to monetary policy and monetary inflation causing home prices to go up, is in fact the increase in the size of homes. Now, there's tremendous variation in the average size of home by state, but in general, for the last 20 or 30 years, the size of American homes just keep growing, and it started to shrink back a little bit during the financial crisis. I would expect the per square footage on the average American home to continue to shrink now.
Interesting. Okay, Catherine, thank you so much. Catherine's website, solari.com, solari.com. A story we have in the news at coasttocoastam.com. A team of scientists studying people who claim to be able to talk to the dead via psychic channeling report finding a very complex phenomenon that deserves more serious study. How about that? While the researchers did not find definitive support for any of the study subjects claiming their psychic abilities, they believe their work shows that such claims of mediumship and psychic channeling can be studied scientifically and under controlled conditions. That would be interesting. In a moment, Ken Gronbach back with us. We're going to be talking about demographics and what the face of the United States could look like within the next 30 years. He's next with us on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Kenneth Gronbach back with us, internationally respected demographer who's been able to forecast societal, commercial, economic, cultural, political phenomena with uncanny accuracy. Ken's unusual blend of marketing savvy and common sense demography based on 20-plus years of proprietary demographic study really sets him apart. Ken keynotes all over the United States and does customized demographic research for companies as well. Ken, welcome back. It's always a pleasure having you on the show.
Oh, it's great to be on, man.
I got to tell you, I have learned so much about demographics from you, and I've applied it. I've applied it to the show and everything else. You're good.
I don't know if I'm good, but demography is destiny.
How come most marketing experts at major corporations don't have your kind of savvy?
That's a good question because, I made the discovery back in the late 80s, actually the early 90s. And when I asked our research guy who did some study for me, and I said, we have a hole in our population that's been created by Generation X. Now, Generation X was born 1965 to 1984. Generation X is small. They had very few parents that were born 25 to 44, and that was, the result was we only had about 50 million people born that 20-year period. It's a hole in our population. And I asked my research guy, and because he'd scoured, Bureau of Labor Statistics, CIA fact book, census data, whatever he could find. And he came back and he said, no one knows this. And I said, what do you mean no one knows it? He said, so we made a discovery that nobody else in marketing understands? And he said,
Jeez.
Yeah, that's it. So you're right. You're absolutely right.
When you look at demographics today, do you have any concerns?
Yeah, big concerns. You know, the big issue right now?
What's that?
No babies.
No babies. People holding back.
Well, I got to tell you, man, you can't do that. You just can't. You know, I have a colleague, Dr. Nicholas Eberstadt, Ph.D., Harvard, who works for the American Enterprise Institute, and he also does work for the State Department. And we compare notes just to keep each other honest. And I consider him just like the best demographer on the planet. The thing that we're discovering is 75% of the countries in the world are below replacement level fertility, which means they're having fewer than 2.2 kids. And what that means is there are all kinds of social, cultural, and especially economic ramifications to that. Big time. Very, very big time. We need to have kids.
Didn't that bite China for its ruling on one kid per family?
Yeah. Well, the one-child-only policy was the biggest demographic blunder in the history of the world. And China instituted that around 1979. They quit it in 2015. But it was too late because they are already missing 500 million people under 40 years old,
Jeez.
Which is why China is failing right now, which is why China's, I listen to people say, well, China's going to take over the United States. China's going to take over the United States financially, and we could get into a war with China. It's not going to happen. It can't happen because they are in the process of crashing and burning right now because of what they did to themselves with their population.
Do they know, Ken, what they did?
Yeah, they do. They do because right now Xi Jinping is encouraging people to have 3 kids.
Jeez.
And as if that could solve the problem. It could solve the problem if they could have children that came out of the mom at 25, 30 years old.
That's right, instant age.
Yeah, and they're dependent. So what they're trying to do right now is fix a problem by creating a new one, and that is to create additional dependent children. And it can't work. It's impossible. It can't work. And they don't do immigration. None of the Asian countries do immigration because they're of xenophobia. They don't like people that are different than them.
What is your forecast for the United States over the next 20, 30 years?
Well, it's going to be an exciting time, George. It is. I mean, a very, very exciting time.
It's exciting. Does that also mean a bumpy time, or just a...
No. I think we're going to be good. I think there's going to be some bumps when it comes to people accepting what's going to happen. But I'll tell you this: China is failing. Okay, let me give you the big picture, the global picture.
Okay.
China is failing. Japan has already failed. Japan literally has about 130 million people population, and they have about 60 million housing units, 10 million of which are empty. And they're empty because they don't have any families. There's nobody to occupy them. So their population is shrinking, and it's called going from an aging country to an age-ed country, which means you have more elderly people than you can support. And that's the way. That's what's happening across Asia. Period. Japan, for the most part. China. I don't think China's going to make it to 2030. I really don't. What will happen is you go into Walmart. Every single thing in Walmart is made in China, is it not?
It seems to be. You're right.
Yeah, everything, right. Well, China is the world's manufacturer. Well, how did they get to be the world's manufacturer? Well, when they went to the one-child-only policy, they created a situation called a demographic dividend, and that is a man and a wife would have one baby. They'd leave it with the mom, or the in-laws,
mm-hmm.
and the husband and wife would go into the city and work for 25, 30 cents an hour. And so the labor situation in China was so good, so favorable. Everything was made in China. Well, the reverse of that's happening now because they're having to pay them $14, $15, $16 an hour, and you can't do that and remain competitive. So what is going to happen, George, is manufacturing is going to go where there is labor. Where is there labor? Is there labor in the EU? No. Is there labor in the Eastern Europe? No. Does Putin have labor? Certainly not.
No.
Some of it may go to India because India has actually a bigger population than China has right now, about 1.4 billion. But India has cultural issues. We can talk about that later. What is going to happen is the Canada, United States, Mexico especially, Central and South America is going to become the center of the earth. And we are going to see onshoring, meaning that manufacturing is coming back with a vengeance. Now, I speak all over the country, and one of the groups I speak to are people in real estate. What are they selling right now? What is in huge demand is industrial property. Why? Because we're going to make stuff here again.
And we have a shortage of factories right now.
Yeah, we have a shortage of factories, but it really, for all intents and purposes, it does not take a long time to put a factory together.
No, you just retool it and get ready to go.
Yeah. That's I just spoke in Connecticut. That's where I am now, and Connecticut was a small industrial state with a population of about 3.5 million, but they are getting ready already for the manufacturing that's coming back. And I find that really all over the United States. It's an exciting time. It really is. I hope I answered your question.
Well, you did. And so that is good news for us as a country.
Oh, we're in marvelous shape. We really are. And we have nothing to fear. That people think that you better speak Mandarin. No, you don't. You're not going to need to speak Mandarin. The Chinese aren't going to come here. They don't have the wherewithal to even cross the waters. No, their economy is going to crash, and their population projected by 2100 it falls in half. Now, no one knows what happens when a population falls in half, except I can tell you right now. I'm not an economist, but it's not good for your economy.
No, not at all. Your market's gone.
And really crash and burn. The United States population should grow significantly but stay in a stable way. Canada's in very good shape, not having enough kids, but Trudeau knows how to do immigration. You want to know what saved the United States? Immigration. Immigration.
That's right.
Where is it from? Because we had a hole in our population that was created by Generation X, those people born 65 to 84, and they could not supply the labor necessary to supply the goods and services for the baby boomers that were born 45 to 64. You have a situation where we sucked in labor from Mexico, and now we have about 64 million Latinos in the United States. Without the Latinos, we wouldn't have a country in 2050. And
they're all working, aren't they?
You know what? I tell folks, I look out at my audience and I say, raise your hand if you're a Latino. And I said, I will get a lot of Latinos. And I say, look at them, folks, okay? I said, here's what I want you to do. I said, I want you to go up and kiss them on the lips and thank them for coming. I mean, I'm being facetious. I said, because without them, we don't have a country in 2050. I said, they're hardworking, they're Catholics, they're family-oriented. How did we get to the point where we deserve that level of immigration? And wonderfully, they're having kids, and they're having kids at a much higher rate than the indigenous folks in the United States. And the net result is going to be is nothing but health and prosperity. It's good for us. It's wonderful.
Stay with us, Ken. We're going to take a short break. Ken's website is linked up at coasttocoastam.com. He's got a few books out there, too, including Upside, Profiting from the Profound Demographic Shifts Ahead, which is a good read, and The Age Curve, How to Profit from the Coming Demographic Storm. And, of course, we're talking about where we're headed over the next 20 or 30 years. We'll talk when we come back about this feeling of polarization in the United States. One side, the other side. What can we do to get back in the middle where everybody seems to agree on things? We'll be back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie back with demographer Ken Gronbach, and we're going to take calls with Ken next hour, so jump on board. Ken, it seems to me that the United States seems to be more polarized now than it ever has been. Do you sense that?
Well, yes, I do, and it's an issue that I deal with because it's happened before. And I don't know how old you are, George, but that's fine. But I'm a baby boomer, and I was born 1945 to 1964.
I'm a boomer, too.
Okay, you're probably a boomer, too. Okay, we grew up at a time in the late 60s, 70s, and early 80s where it was hippies versus the establishment. True?
Yep.
Do you remember that?
I remember that era, sure.
Okay. Do you remember Kent State?
I sure do.
Okay, well, Kent State, I remember it actually closed our school, and I went to a huge state school out in California. What was that all about? Why did we have hippies and establishment, and they were always fighting, and there were protests everywhere?
Well, it's primarily the Vietnam War that was, I think, the catalyst for this, but it just got out of control.
It probably didn't matter that what it was, but it had to be something like that. And the reason for that was young people tend liberals, middle-aged people tend to be moderates, and older people tend to be conservatives. If you took the moderates out of the picture, like sent them away, and all you had was young liberals and older conservatives, you would have hippies and the establishment. What we have right now in the United States, and that was as a result, let's go back to the 60s, 70s, and early 80s again. You had no moderates because the moderates were born 1925 to 1944, and they were tiny. It was a tiny group.
Mm-hmm. And they were not very vocal, were they?
But they were called to silence. And the net result is they couldn't buffer the rest of the population. What do we have now? We have a huge population of young people. In fact, in 2024, George, we're going to have 170 million people under 40 years old, or 40 years old and under. 170 million. We've never had that before. It's a huge group, and they're going to change our culture. The group in the middle currently now is Generation X, and Generation X, born 1965 to 1984, is a diminutive population. It's about 11 or 12% smaller than the baby boomers that are ahead of them, and maybe almost close to 20% smaller than the population right behind them, called Generation Y millennials.
And they'll all have cell phones, Ken, won't they?
And they have no buffer. So why are we fighting? We're fighting because we don't have moderates. We don't have a moderate population group to buffer the two groups. What is going to happen? What's going to happen is that the generation 40 years old and under, Generation Y millennials, and Generation Z are going to age. And as they age, they're going to amass wealth. And as they amass wealth, they're not going to want to share it. And they become moderates and eventually become conservatives. So demographically, this thing is going to fix itself. We're fighting amongst ourselves right now, but that's going to go away.
Interesting. Now, you wrote an article recently called The Nation of Floridas. What is that all about?
Well, it's about us, George. It's about baby boomers.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, see, keep in mind, baby boomers are currently 59 to 78 years old. There were 80, give or take, 80 million of us born. And yes, we've lost some, but we haven't lost many. We are going to be the largest group or the largest generation ever to retire and become seniors. And if you don't believe it, I live in South Florida. You can feel the ground shake in South Florida with the amount of construction that's going on. South Florida has a population right now of about 23 million.
Wow.
Best guess, I would say next 10 or 15 years is going to go to 35 million. I don't even know if I'm going to be able to afford to live there. But so what's happening is we are going to have the biggest group of senior people that the United States has ever had, and really for two reasons. One, it was the baby boomers were a big group when they were born, and two, the baby boomers don't have dying on their punch list. So what are they doing? The baby boomers, it is estimated that baby boomers have $100 trillion in assets, and that's stock and real estate and cash, whatever. $100 trillion. They have money, they have mass, and they have motivation. And the motivation is they don't want to die. So what's going to happen to the senior population in the United States? It's going to double, and there's no way around it.
Now, what does that mean to Social Security, Ken?
Well, thank God for the Latinos, because without a critical mass of people paying in, and those people, I mean, if you look at our population, let's just break it down into three parts, not four parts. We have young people, we have middle-aged people, and we have seniors. If you don't have a good crop of middle-aged people that paying in to Social Security, then the people that are collecting it are going to have a problem. What do we have? We have a good crop, and that good crop was the population born 65 to 84 plus the Latinos, and we brought Latinos in by the tens of millions. So we're fine. It's not Social Security is secure.
That's a good thing, only because they're putting money into it.
Yeah, I know.
If you were going to start up a new company, what business would you go in, knowing the markets that are out there and the demographics?
Well, I tell you, I don't know where to start, and there's a reason for that. Well, first of all, everything healthcare. Remember, baby boomers, $100 trillion, money, motivation. It's who they are, and they're going to. I think we're going to beat cancer. I think we're going to beat heart disease, and I think we're going to do that because baby boomers are throwing money at that like you cannot believe. You don't believe me? Come to Florida and take a look. See what it's like to live with senior people. So, did I answer the question? What was your question?
Well, that was it. You got it.
So what's going to happen is we're going to do everything senior, and it's going to be throughout the United States. And it's an interesting phenomena. We're living longer, and I'm I've got a brother that's 86, and I tell him all the time. I say, "You're my idol." I said, "Yeah, because every time I look at him, I think I have at least that long to live."
My mother's 94. She still drives.
Isn't that amazing?
She comes on the show every May when she should be 95 in May of next year. And, I mean, she seems to have more energy than most people. It's unbelievable.
It's very cool. Listen, I just want to give you some more good news because and it's not all good news, but what products are going to do well? Who buys the most automobiles in the United States? Men between 40 and 45 years old.
That's the key demographic.
Population, and right now, the population of men that are 40 to 45 years old is a small population. It's Generation X. It will be the largest generation ever born in the United States, and that's Generation Y millennials at 88 million, and they're augmented by Latinos.
Now, when will that happen?
That's going to happen effective in about a year or so.
Oh, geez! Wow.
Yeah, no, it's very, very good. And on top of that, I can remember one time I had as a client when I was in the marketing field an organization that was very similar to Pearl. They sold eyeglasses, And who buys the most eyeglasses? Again, men and women 40 to 45. And it's
right.
because something happens to their eyes called presbyopia, and they need to get glasses.
Readers, as we call them, right?
Yeah. Well, baby boomers drove that business for years, but now it's slowed down significantly. But guess what's going to happen? Now you have Generation Y and Generation Z that are headed right for that market. But that's not even the best of it. The best of what's happening right now is housing. Housing. We are 25 million housing units short of our needs. So do we have are houses going to sell? Yes, of course they're going to sell. Do we have a shortage? Yes, of course we have a shortage. And are they, is money tight? Is interest high? Yeah, all of that. I've heard all of that. I think I paid 20% for a mortgage at one time when I first bought a house. But what is going to sell right now, George, is multifamily. And you can't believe how creative people are getting with multifamily. And then once that takes hold, and once the new generation starts earning money, and they will, because they're really just finding their way into the labor force. It's all good for the United States. Housing is the economy. The economy is housing.
I'm seeing multi-apartments going up all over the place here in the Midwest. All over the place, Ken.
Now, are they 1 or 2 bedroom?
I don't know. I've never went in to look at one. But
this is the thing that makes me crazy, George, because if you they were building apartments here in a small town in Connecticut, and they were scheduled to be 2 bedroom, and they made them cut it back to 1 bedroom. Why? Because you have to have 2 bedrooms if a young couple is going to have kids.
That's right.
And so
storage and everything else.
Yeah, what you've done is you've kind of guaranteed that they're not going to have kids. That's why housing is such an important issue right now. I spoke to manufactured housing, 6-8 months ago, and it's amazing what they're building now. They don't look like mobile homes anymore. They're attractive. You could buy one for $100,000, which is actually cheap today, and put it on a lot.
Oh my gosh, yeah, absolutely. Now, fertility rates around the planet have dropped over the last 50 years, as you've said. Is it a medical condition or is it done by design?
Well, there's a couple of theories. And it's not this. And like I said, this is not all good news, George. One of the issues is, what's a third of the content of the internet? It's sexual context. Context.
I would know that.
Well, it is. It's a third.
I'll trust you.
And how is that supported? Well, it's supported essentially by men, and men that have can turn to science or turn to their computers for a relationship. Computers don't have babies, and I'm not kidding, because as technology spreads across the world, we see the fertility of the destination drops like a stone. That's
dramatic. That's bizarre too, isn't it?
Well, when you think about the kids 8, 9 years old on their phones, what are they watching? What are they learning about being a wife or being a husband? What are they learning about relationships? And it's awful. And you won't hear any politicians talking about it, not any at all. And the level of addiction with kids is, it's above 50%.
That's
it's
huge.
Above, and essentially for men in general, it's above 50%.
I remember the stories you would tell us about the motorcycle industry and how they missed the mark on so many things. I mean, will that ever come back?
Yeah, well, it's yes and no.
That's how you started, right?
Yeah, well, we had 140 American Honda motorcycle dealers as clients. And we had every Honda dealer from the tip of Maine to Pittsburgh to Washington, D.C. And in 1986, we ran, a lot of advertising for all these dealers. And I'll get a call from Honda in California, and they said, Ken, did you run the ads? And we said, yeah. And they said, well, Kawasaki, Suzuki, and Yamaha all have exactly the same problem, so it's not us. And they said, and this awful bike made in the United States called Harley Davidson, leaks oil, weighs 1,000 pounds, is selling like crazy. What's going on? And what was going on was baby boomers left the market. They simply, we sold motorcycles to men 16 to 24 years old. That was it. 16, 24, 25, they sold the bike, got a ring, got married.
They grow out of that age, that's it. They're gone.
And they were gone. Yeah, truly. So what happened was then Harley took over and had a good run for another 20 years. But now the baby boomers have grown out of Harley, and Harley is tanking. Whenever the baby boomers leave a market, it's death. When they go into a market, it's amazing. And you're going to find the exact same thing happening with Generation Y millennials, because instead of baby boomers were about 78 to 80 million, the millennials are 88 million. And it's a monster generation. Yes, they're entering the labor force late, and they're having babies late, they're marrying late, but they're going to do all those things. And so you're going to watch the economy of the United States is going to be fine. It's going to be absolutely fine.
Interesting. Stay with us, Ken. We're going to take a short break and then come right back and take an hour of phone calls with you. Ken Gronbach with us. We are opening up the phone lines for you right now.